Well, Thurman, I guess back behind here you can see this is Charlie Daniels's land right here, and that's his house back up there on top of overlooking all this. He's got a really pretty setup, and this is
We're sitting on Sugar Hill.
Sugar Hill.
Mm-hmm.
This is Sugar Hill.
Is that right?
Twin Pines Ranch.
Right, he had a song called Sugar Hill Saturday Night,
Sugar Hill.
and this was Sugar Hill.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time he named everything, and of course the two pine trees here, back when they bought this place, there just weren't any pines in this country, and there was these two pines, so they were out of place basically, and that's why he named the ranch Twin Pines Ranch. And so he has Twin Pines Ranch, and then the lake down here at the far end is shallow, and that was Woolly Swamp. So everything had a name to it, you know. But yeah, this was Charlie's dream. He could be out here a million miles from anybody, or he could be in downtown Nashville in 45 minutes, you know, if he had to. And he wanted a working ranch. He wanted cattle that he could rope and handle. He wanted horses he could ride and rope off of. And Charlie made a hand.
Absolutely. Well, for those people that don't know, I don't know who wouldn't know, but Charlie Daniels is a very talented musician, very talented fiddle player. He's got a lot of great music out there. And like I said, if you don't know who Charlie Daniels is, you might want to start looking him up.
Might want to get your head out of the ground.
Might want to get your head out of the ground. Thurman, what is your favorite song that Charlie Daniels has?
You know, there's a lot of them, and that's a good question. And I think one time somebody asked Charlie that, and he couldn't answer it really. On my phone, and when you call, I get long-haired country boy.
Long-haired country boy.
And of course, my long hair's, you know, I guess I'm just envious. Brings back memories. You know. I've gone to country now, and I've kind of gotten past the boy stage. So, so I guess if we could have gotten Charlie to write a song about the bald-headed old country man, you know, might have fit in there. But that long-haired country boy, out of all of his stuff, of course, everybody traditionally will say Devil Went Down to Georgia, which was a fantastic song and still is, and probably one of the most recorded songs, not only by Charlie, but everybody else that's come along. I really like Caballo Diablo, and that was off one of his early albums. I don't know if y'all are familiar with Caballo Diablo, but a lot of real fast Spanish type picking guitar. And it's a story about this black horse that can't be rode. And this guy jumps up and grabs him by the mane, and it's a tremendous song. And, you know, he did an album, Billy the Kid. It was a great song. I like that one. I catch myself playing more of the old ones. And Charlie, in later years, really got into the gospel music. And he did a gospel album that I think's phenomenal, and I played that a lot driving. You know, it's just on a CD. I'll pop that in, and it's Tales from the Lonesome Pine.
Oh yeah.
And that's a super good album. Mostly traditional, but with some new stuff. I'll Fly Away is one of my favorites that Charlie did. So I don't know. It'd be real hard. If I just said one, I'm sure in about 5 minutes I'd slap your arm and say, wait a minute, I got a better one, you know.
Oh, yeah.
But Charlie, he always said it took him years to become an overnight success. Somebody in the early 70s, when the Jam started off, had made the comment that Charlie was an overnight success. Well, Charlie, he played wherever he could play, I mean, literally for years. And he worked in junkyards, he worked as a prison guard, he did all kinds of jobs.
Wow.
And
I didn't know that.
oh yeah, and just trying to break in. And he was, we were out, he did a song he wrote called Sweetwater, Texas. That's another one of my favorites.
I don't think I've even heard that one before.
Well, I'll tell you a funny story about that. We were down at the King Ranch, and we'd carried some mares down there to breed to Mr. Sandpeppy and Peppy Sand Badger. And T.O. Clayberg was running the ranch, and they'd set up a big cutting at the time. And Buster Welch was had a deal with the King Ranch that he actually had an office down there in the old vet office, and it involved the Sandpeppies and Peppy Sand Badger horses that he was noted for. Well, anyway, Buster was down there, and Red Stegall was down there, and I'd gotten there a couple of days early with the horses. Charlie had played Cheyenne, Wyoming, was on his way to New York, had 3 or 4 days open. And he called me to see if I could pick them up at the airport if they came in. I said, sure. So I went over and saw Mr. Welch and told him, I said, Mr. Welch, I said, my boss, Charlie Daniels, is coming down. And he said, I said, he's a big fan of yours and he'd like to see you, meet you. And he said, well, yeah, you bring him down here. So the next day, me and Red and Charlie, Red was driving, and Buster got in the vehicle, and we was riding around the ranch, and of course not all of it because it's humongous deal, but it's getting a taste of it. And that night they had a big banquet of sorts over at the old sea captain's house, and we went, and I was invited because I was with Charlie, of course. And we went in, and Red was playing like Little Joe the Wrangler, traditional Western music that he's noted for. And he said, Charlie, play us one. And there was a bunch of rich people in that room, and I'm not sure, there was a fraction of them knew who Charlie was either, you know. And Charlie said, oh, Red, you're doing great. I'm enjoying this. You play. No, Charlie, you play us one. So Charlie said, okay. So he handed his guitar to him. It was an acoustic guitar. And Charlie played Caballo Diablo. And I mean, when he does that, he's up and down, it's wearing that guitar out, just really going after it. And everybody goes crazy, and they hand the guitar over to Red, and Red looks down in the hole on the guitar, and he says, you retained some of that. And they all laughed, and he played 3 or 4 more, and they said, Charlie, play us another one. And he tried to bow out, and no, you play us one. So he did Sweetwater, Texas. Well, that's where Buster Welch is from. And Buster looked just as funny, and he said, well, Charlie, he says, I've never heard that before. And he says, well, we'll send you copies of all my stuff, you know. Said, I'd be glad to. He said, well, somebody ought to record that. And Charlie said, well, I recorded it, said I wrote it. And he said, well, how did you know about this place and that place? And Charlie said, well, I worked down there, you know, for a time, and what he was doing while he was there. And he said, really? He said, yeah. And so Buster, all of a sudden now, Charlie's his best friend. Yeah. And Buster met kings and princes and presidents and music stars. Nobody impressed Buster. Buster was Buster, and nicest guy ever lived. So anyway, Charlie said, well, Buster, are you going to ride Mr. Sandpeppy tomorrow? And Charlie said, Buster said, well, Charlie, they retired Mr. Sandpeppy to stud several years ago. Said he hadn't seen a saddle in years. And Charlie said, well, that's just my luck. Said, I've always heard about Mr. Sandpeppy, and said, we bring mares down here and breed them. And said, I was hoping I'd get to see him work. He said, well, we'll sure take you over and let you see him and Badger tomorrow too. I said, okay. So next day I was out there riding around. They had a racetrack. Of course, King Ranch used to be big on running horses. And Joe Stiles' daddy had brought in some Longhorns just for effect, you know, look pretty out behind the thing. Of course, their big thing was Santa Gertrudis. And anyway, they had some horses for company to get on, just ride around the racetrack. And I'm riding around, and this young man comes by me. His name was Steve. He was out of South Dakota, worked down there. This horse was bucking and bucking and running full tilt. And he pulled up beside me, and I said, and I never did tell him about I work for Charlie Daniels. I work for Twin Pines Ranch. A lot of times they make stuff go up if they thought you was buying for Charlie.
Absolutely.
And so anyway, Steve said, I said, what are you riding, Steve? He said, Sandpeppy. I said, Mr. Sandpeppy? He said, yeah, Sandpeppy. I said, you're kidding me. I said, what's the deal on him? He said, there's some big guy down here from Nashville named Charlie Daniels that wrote some darn song about Sweetwater, Texas, and he sang it last night. Said, Buster's going to an exhibition at SOB, and said he ain't seen a saddle in I forget how long. So I'm trying to get the edge off of it. He takes off again. He'd pass me every few minutes. So anyway, we went over to the deal, and I didn't say nothing to Charlie about it. And we went in, and they were cutting. You know, usually in cutting, you're cutting calves weighing 250, 400 pounds. this cutting Santa Gertrudis, I mean, I bet was weighing 800 or better. Seeing them son of guns. And it was impressive when you seen them little horses get down on the ground facing one of them big buggers off. Well, anyway, Charlie, we're sitting there, and they made an announcement that they had a special guest that did a song the night before called Sweetwater, Texas for Buster Welch. And in honor of that, Buster was going to exhibition Mr. Sandpepe. And boy, you talk about a place going crazy, you know. And Buster come out on him. And that horse, Sandpepe, if you ever watch films of him cutting, he was like a rattlesnake. And that was his trick. He'd let a calf get almost all the way by him, and he's in front of him. And then the calf goes over here, and he's singing bigger. He's over. And he got Buster almost out of that saddle 2 or 3 times. But he cut, people whooping and hollering, Charlie having a time. So then I think it was Ms. Welch. It was a lady come out and showed Pepe San Badger, which they were still showing at the time. And they were standing too. And Ms. Welch, I believe it was Ms. Welch, showed Pepe San Badger. And then she rode over to where we were sitting there, in a nice covered arena with some bleacher seats there at the ranch. And she said, Mr. Daniels, would you like to cool him out? Oh, son, you talk about, you couldn't give Charlie $1 million, tickled him no better. So Charlie got on Sand Badger and rode him outside, and they was out there riding him in a big circle, talking, you know, cooling him out. And later on that evening, I was back over there, and I made a picture of him and Red in the barn. I've got that picture of them holding Pepe San Badger. And that picture made the rounds. And I was talking to Red probably been a month or 2 ago, where Gail, his wife, won. And they was wanting to use that picture. And I told him, I said, well, I can tell you who made it. I said, I don't know where my negative is, but I made it on a regular film type camera. But I said, I got it somewhere. But I said, you know, I have people email me that picture and think I'd like to see it, where they've run across it somewhere on the internet or something. But I made the picture, is what's funny, but people think I hadn't seen it or think Charlie'd like to see it. I said, I made the darn picture. So at any rate, I did a thing for them that Red just came out with a real nice biography, and I don't know if they used it or not. They were having trouble about reproducing it in a book, you know, from what they had to work with. But anyway, Red was down there, and like I said earlier, before I ever met Charlie, Red lived about 4 miles this way on Chicken Road. We're on Central Pike.
Okay.
Chris Ledoux lived about 2 miles this way over here on Franklin Road with his mother and dad. That's before he became world champion bareback rider.
I think Chris Ledoux, he may have re-sung that song or something too, didn't he?
Probably.
I think I might have heard it on one of his albums, Caballo the Outlaw, or
probably.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of guys would record different songs, and it was amazing where somebody, maybe 3 or 4 different name artists would record something and not go anywhere.
Absolutely.
And then all of a sudden another group cut it, and there it would go. And Chris, he was doing well. And then of course, when I'm not a big Garth Brooks fan, and a lot of people are, and that's okay. But when Garth came out with that song about a broken, wore out Chris Ledoux tape, and he started using Chris in his shows, and I love old, what's his name for that? But as far as, that helped put Chris on the map. It picked up a lot of new fans for Chris. But he was one of the nicest guys. They shot a Wrangler Cowboy Country Christmas here. And they were over at the barn, and what they would do is we would drive the steers down the return alley backwards. And then Charlie and Chris would be sitting down there where the alley's starting to narrow on 2 horses. Well, then they would drive the steers back around to the front and go through those big front gates there with the sign up, Twin Pines Ranch and all that. And they would ride over to the return alley going up to the barn. And when they would get there, they would talk about Christmas and what Christmas was all about and how, you know, what all it meant to them and the cowboy Christmas and this stuff. And then they would get off their horses, and they would cut right then. But they would get off the horses, and I was doing like a duck walk. They would hand me the reins. I'm not in the picture. I'm just walking the horses out of the way. And they're standing there talking, and I start walking the horses off. Well, every time Chris would get off the horse, he'd go, "Thank you, Thurman." And they go, "Cut, cut. The Thurman's not there, Chris." He go, "Oh, man, I'm sorry. They go, "Anyway, we're going to shoot it again." So We did that about 5 times, and every time they get off the horse, Chris would go, "Thank you, Thurman." It was automatic. He just he had manners, and that's how you did, you know. And everybody he'd thank you. But and he did a statue. He was an artist, Chris was, and he did a statue that's about that tall, and I forget it's something the wild horse, some kind of deal like that. But it's Chris on a bareback horse. And it's beautiful bronze, and it's up there in Charlie's house. And he brought that out here one day. We was roping, had his wife and kids, and he was in a beat-up old van. And they all rolled out, and he had that statue for Charlie. And, I mean, it about takes 2 people to carry the darn thing, but it's nice. But Charlie just loved Chrissy. Chrissy did him, but Chris was just real down to earth, you know.
Sounds like Charlie Daniels. Sounds like he was a real cowboy, you know. He wasn't somebody like these newer people talking about
talking the talk. He
wasn't just talking the talk. You know, these newer country singers and whatnot coming out, they talk about hunting, fishing, and cowboying, and you know, all this and that, and you know, most of them they probably ain't never even went hunting and fishing.
There was a time that Charlie didn't want you saddling his horse.
Yeah.
That was you had things to do. He'd saddle his own horse, and Charlie. It was funny, early on, I've heard Charlie, somebody say something about him being a cowboy, and he'd go, "I'm not a cowboy." He took that as being like an honor. I mean, that's like as good as it gets on anything if you're a sure enough cowboy. And Charlie grew up, his daddy was a timber buyer. They never finished school where they started. Charlie said he always had to fight off, you know, some bully every school he started out at. And Ms. LaRue, Charlie's mother, she was just a sweetheart, and she's an old South Carolina or North Carolina woman from Wilmington. And she talked very Southern, Miss LaRue did. In fact, everybody loved LaRue, and the band named the crew bus the Miss LaRue, Lady LaRue. They had the Lady LaRue across the front of that bus. And she'd say, "Thurman," and she'd come over to the barn, love to hang out and visit, you know. But she said when Charles, she always called Charlie Charles. She said when Charles was a little boy, said he'd climb up in my lap and he'd say, "Mama, when I get big, I'm not going to be no traveling man." And she'd go, "Thurman, I think he travels more than any man I ever knowed of." And she just laughed. And she lived in that double wide. They was going to build her a house. She didn't want a house. She wanted that old double wide. And they was going to move her in up here in their house. And she said, nope, she wouldn't want her mother-in-law moving in on her, and she wasn't moving in on Hazel. Hazel said, "No, you can live here. We got plenty of room." Nope. And that was the deal. If she'd moved this was when they were still trying to get her to move over here. She would move, but she wouldn't move in the old double wide. And she was funny. She'd come over one day, and we'd stay on her about not opening the door for people. You know, people drive up, don't open the door for them, LaRue. And she would. She'd open the door for anybody. And she came over to the barn one day and she said, "Thurman, I just had a most interesting experience." I said, "What's that, LaRue?" She said, "I had a big, fat man, heavy man come up to my door." And I said, "You opened it?" And she said, "Yes, I opened it, Thurman." And said he had on a big hat like Charles wears. And he had a big buckle on like Charles wears. And he had on sunglasses, and said, he said he needed to see Charlie Daniels, and said, I told him Charlie was never hardly here. He was on the road, which Charlie was. They about lived on the road when they, you know, when they was home, but they stayed on the road a lot. And it said he knew for a fact that Charlie was home. And he said, no, said Charles was, told him, said Charles is on the road touring. He said, well, what it is, said, I'm Charlie's brother. And said, I hadn't seen him in years and years. And she said, I told the young man, said, you know, said me and Charles's father was awful close. And so we talked about everything. And said, I'm Charles's mother, and he never mentioned Charles having a brother. And said, he started backpedaling and said, he said, well, everybody said that he looked so much like Charlie that he had to be Charlie's brother. Yeah. And what it was, he was just trying to make up lost space. But thought, here's this idiot walking up, knocking on the door of a double wide, trying to explain to this nice old Southern lady that he's Charlie Daniels' brother, and it's his mother he's selling this nonsense to. So
she didn't fall for that.
No, but man, she is a sweetheart. Everybody loved LaRue.
At At what time do you think that at what age do you think Charlie, first picked up a fiddle?
Well, he has a friend, I think is still living, that is an undertaker of all things in North Carolina.
Okay.
And when Charlie, I think now it's in his books, but I think he was 13 or 14. He found out he had a guitar, and he knew like 2 or 3 chords. And so Charlie wanted to learn those chords. And he said from that point on, it was like trying to find anybody that knew more chords and learn them from them. So he was actually, I think they sort of formed somewhat of a little band playing schools and stuff around close, I think. Now, I'm not positive, but during his high school years. But he was honing his craft. And I think maybe, I wouldn't swear to this, and it's in his books again if you look. I think the next instrument was probably a mandolin.
Okay.
And then he went to the fiddle, I believe. And they had a band by the time he got out of high school, and they had a creosote factory. And there was an old black man that he thought a lot of, worked at the creosote factory, and his daddy was kind of gotten big in the timber business. And Charlie was working at the creosote factory, and they laid some people off, and they was going to promote one into like a supervisory position. And they told Charlie they was going to let the black man off, had a wife and little kids. Charlie was single, living at home with his mother and dad, and going to make him like the manager or whatever. And Charlie told him no. He said that the guy deserved it. It wasn't right. He wasn't going to do it. And so Charlie was like the most non-prejudiced guy you ever met in your life. And so anyway, Charlie wanted to make music. And so they would travel. And he always appreciated all the military, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, all of them. He had a special place in his heart for the Marine Corps. And what it was that's where they were playing mostly in the Carolinas, was these Marine bases or clubs outside the Marine bases. And I was a corpsman with the Marines during the Vietnam era. And I'd gotten pretty heavy. Of course, there wasn't no way I could get my uniform on. And I went on a binge deal and lost a world of weight. And I got to where I could put my old Marine uniform on. Of course, I had my corpsman insignia. I was a medical corpsman. And I was so proud. I got it on in my hat, and I went up to Charlie's house. He was home, knocked on the door. Charlie said, "Now that looks like a Marine. That's what you're supposed to look like." And he was behind the counter, and he said, "Walk over here, man. I want to see something." He was in a chair doing something. And I hadn't put on spit-shine shoes. I just had on a pair of old dink shoes like that. And he said, "Nope, you got to go back and change them." He said, "I never saw a Marine that did have on spit-shine shoes." So that's the number one thing you notice. But he played there. He went up to D.C. He was playing small clubs. He had a friend in Texas that they stopped on some of the tours, and they were going out just playing anywhere and everywhere they could play. They stayed down around El Paso for a good while in Texas. And then he had Taz DeGregorio was his piano man for years and years. Taz had gotten drafted, and I was on Guam for 6 months, and I found out later Taz was on Guam at the same time. And I'm sure we had to run into everybody because the island wasn't that big, but I never did know it if I did. But Taz told me later on, he said when he got back, Charlie naturally had to get another guitar player or a piano player, and said he told Charlie, he said, "If you ever have an opening, I want it, you know." Yeah. And so there came a time that Charlie was able to hire Taz, and Charlie went way back, and Taz lived on the other side of Nashville. The buses would leave right down here where Charlie's studio and the band office was, and Taz was notorious for showing up late. Mm-hmm. So the word was, if you aren't there when the buses leave, you be at the show. Oh, yeah. But we ain't worried about you. We ain't going to be looking for you. We ain't going to be waiting on you. Mm-hmm. And if the buses is going to leave at 12 o'clock, they didn't leave at 11:55, and they didn't leave at 12:05. They left at 12 o'clock. Yeah. I mean, they was religious about that. And Taz would miss the buses every once in a while. He'd have to fly or buy his own plane tickets or drive his own car or something. But he didn't show up one night. Nobody thought anything of it. And Charlie called me about 5 o'clock the next morning, I guess, and they'd gotten word on the road that Taz had gotten killed in a one-car accident. And he recorded a lot of his own stuff, blues mostly. He was a real big blues man. And he'd been in the studio, and he was trying to make a bus, and he was running late and lost it in the curve and got killed. And for a long time, Charlie wouldn't hire a piano player. I mean, Taz was irreplaceable. And so finally he got a guy come in and played and did a good job. And he was totally different than Taz. I mean, personality, the whole bit, and fit in fine. The boys got along with him good. And but again, Charlie had a tight group. They were family. But going back to the cowboy thing, Charlie wrote a song for the NFR in Vegas. And they made him honorary mayor. This was a year or two before he died. He was mayor of Las Vegas for a day. And when Charlie died, they took, every year, they would take PRCA cowboys that had been to the finals or were well-known, producers, clowns, somebody, they had to do something, be a note, not just be a PRCA member. But they would announce their name and tell a little bit about them the year they died at the finals, and they'd lead a horse out without anybody in the saddle, and they'd talk about whoever it was. So the year Charlie died, they did him that way. They thought he was a cowboy, whether he did or not, you know. Well, but he was a heck of a roper. We were down on Chicken Road one time. We had some Tibio colts, and them Tibios, a lot of them colts would have a little buck in them. Now you just would. Charlie had them big Mexican rails on, and usually he was riding Old Major, Rebel, or Freckles, or something like that. For some reason, we'd been roping, and he was still on that colt, and about a 3 or 4 year old. I mean, he wasn't no 10 or 12-year-old horse. And we was out bringing the cows down off of this hill, 70 acres down here. We had an arena down there. It had a lot of brush that high. And Charlie come across that brush and hung that spur in that horse and that brush on the other side. That son of a gun went to firing. I mean, he was bucket. And Charlie looked over and just as unconcerned, he says, "What do I do now, bud?" I said, "Give him his head, get his head up, boss," or something. Yeah. And the colt just fired about 6 times and stopped. And it was funny. I heeled mostly when I roped. Very rarely ever headed. And if I did, it was out in the field. It wasn't in the arena or nothing. And honestly, Charlie loved it. Leroy worshiped team roping. I tolerated it. I mean, it was some way to make money. As far as just dying for it, and I won some buckles and won a little money, lost more than I made. But we had some crossbred Longhorn Coriani over across the road, cows, mama cows, big cows, and had racks on them, big racks. And Charlie, he didn't want us using a squeeze chute. He wanted, when he come home, he wanted to try to save the doctrine if we could for him, he called it. Well, to be perfectly honest, and I've never told this before, y'all get the scoop here, I would take syringes and we'd go head and heel a cow. I'd get off and go up and do that and wasn't doing squat. But Charlie was doctoring the cattle. He wanted to have a purpose for what we were doing. He wanted them headed and heeled. He didn't want them going through a squeeze chute. He wanted to help doctor them. And I might squirt a little paste down their throat or something. Well, anyway, we had, old Parker was a red-headed boy who worked here, and Parker was a heck of a cowboy. Oh, he was ready. And Roper, oh, he could rope with the best of them. Leroy, my little black cowboy, he was tough, and them two was like that, you know. And they headed, and they tolerated me because I was the old guy that sat around the office too much, not doing nothing but trying to make money, and they was out doing all the fun stuff. So we go over there, and we had the deal. Parker's going to take, Leroy's going to head the first one. And then Charlie's going to ride in and heel him. I'm going to run up and doctor him. And then let that one up. Then Parker's going to head one. I'm going to go in and heel it. And then Leroy's going to give it the shot or do whatever. And we're going to swap up. And I'd be heeling, Charlie'd be heeling, Parker and Leroy's heading. Leroy, I bet I never saw that man miss 7 head and the whole time he was here. And he was here a lot of years. I mean, he was a roping machine.
That's pretty impressive.
Oh, yeah. And Steve Parker was about as good, this red-headed kid. So we get over there, and here comes Leroy, and they're showing out for Charlie. And Leroy was a little bit of a showboat, to be honest with you. Well, he comes out and he throws his rope. He hits right in the back of that cow's horns and bounces off. Parker starts dying laughing, and he's chasing the cow. We're all following the cow. And he's, Leroy, I thought you could rope. Oh, and he throws his rope, hits the edge of that horn and bounces off. Well, I've got this old medium hard lay 3/8 here to heel with, and I've got a rope, big as a wagon wheel.
Yeah.
I'm coming out there doing a swing loop. I just throw the wildest rope you ever seen, sideways sort of. It goes over that cow's horns, and I snatch the slack, and I dally, and no Freckles, the horse is on, he'd head or heel. I turned him off. Charlie is dying laughing, and he comes up through there, and he heels the cow. He said, Bud, when did you start heading? I said, Charlie, there ain't nothing to heading. I said, which it is. It's a trick to heading. There's not much to heeling. I admire a good header. I never was one. But I was doing this for their benefit. I said, there ain't nothing to heading, Charlie. I said, that's the most overrated thing in the world.
Yeah.
And you've got one. Boy, they're mad now. They're sitting back there running their mouth. So we take off again. Darn if Leroy don't come in, do the same darn thing. His rope bounces off. Parker comes in there. He ain't saying nothing this time, but he's roping. He throws that rope, it bounces off. I ride up there behind him, and by gosh, I suck that cow up and dally, turn her off. Well, here comes Charlie. He is hoo-hawing. It's a wonder he didn't miss. I thought he was going to fall off a horse. Yeah. Bud, I tell you what, I don't think Leroy or Parker, either one ever roped a head like you did. They can't rope them horns. I said, Charlie, I said, it's just nothing to it. That's why I don't fool with it. Yeah. And they was riding back. Charlie was out front, was riding back over here. And Parker and Leroy was back up there, set up there on his button that office, come over here and show us up. He was ticked off. Well, anyway, next morning, Parker comes into work, and he's got this longhorn cow head he's come up with somewhere, the skull and the horns, and he's made him a dummy that night and puts it on a bale of hay. And he's back there, he's working on them horns. And David Bates is our horseshoer at the time, and he's done heard about all this, and he's ragging them about me roping and how sorry they are. And I'd been out there roping the dummy. We had one of those handy heelers in the barn that sits there and just kicks. And we'd line up and rope that dummy and fooling with it. And I was walking back, and Parker had that a cow's head on a bale of hay. And I was walking to the office, and old Parker said, let's see you rope this dummy. I said, I wouldn't waste my rope on a dummy. I said, that's just wasting time. And Bates said, I hear you smoked them. I hear you had to rope the big horns. I said, yeah. I said, these boys are learning. Well, let's see you rope this one. And I couldn't have done this again in a million years. Truth, I'm sitting here. I threw that rope over my shoulder. I didn't know where it was going. That loop went over them horns as pretty about as far as from here, that side by side, and I jerked the slack and threw my rope down. I said, boys, there just ain't nothing to it. Oh, Bates, he about died. But anyway, went on, and after that, we'd be out catching cattle or something. You rope ahead, Charlie ain't here. Let's see what you can do, Charlie ain't here. And we was all friends, but we did a lot of ragging, That's how that worked. But, yeah, it was I couldn't have done it again on purpose probably in a year, But all my heeling I ever done was heeling pretty much. I mean, anything I did at a rodeo roping. And I rode bulls and barebacks when I was a young fella. And then I clowned a couple of years and then went with the state. I was in charge of their horse-mounted ranger program. We started that up. And then I went to work with Charlie. And then we got into the roping game. And then next thing you know, we're putting on rodeos. And so it was always something different all the time, pretty much. I'd call Charlie Daniels a cowboy any day of the week.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Anything you want to add to that, Logan?
Well,
any questions you want to throw in there?
Part of what I'm curious of, so Vietnam War and stuff like that, I was curious, so what was your background with that, everything? I kind of wanted to go into some of that.
What was that?
Vietnam.
Oh, Vietnam, yeah.
So what was that like? How old were you when you went in,
I turned 21 in Vietnam. And, and I was an old man. And what was funny, a lot of 18-year-olds with the Marines. And some of the guys, not many of them, but a few we had with us, had an option. They could go to jail or they could join the Marines, and usually nothing very terrible. But at any rate, I took and joined the Navy, and tried not to make too long of a story out of it, but basically I was on a destroyer for about 2 weeks and thought I was going to die. It had a big storms come through. I was out of Mayport, Florida. They went out in the ocean and cut the engines, and they call a destroyer a tin can for a reason. They do this. They just, no rhythm to it at all. It bounces like a tin can, and that's why they get that. I thought, boy, I have messed up royal, joining the Navy. So I took and got back, and I was talking to the recruiter. He said, well, you like animals, and said, you've got a couple of years of college, said, you'd make a corpsman. I said, well, what does a corpsman do? He said, oh, man, you work in the hospital 9 to 5, got these pretty nurses. Said, you'd probably be in Corpus Christi or Memphis and hospitals. Said, man, that's a sweet deal. And said, everybody wants it. And I said, well, I might want to be one of these corpsmen. He says, well, you got to extend, and said, it's an 18-week Class A school. And I finally did graduate from college after I got back. But to be perfectly honest, I never went to a formal training anywhere that matched that course school. I mean, it was materia medica, it was everything you can imagine, metrology, pharmacology. And if you didn't pass every course every 2 weeks, you got set back and you had to take those 2 weeks over. You did that 3 times and you was out. And at any rate, I went through the course school, and then I went to Guam. And on Guam, I worked on an Aerovac ward. And what they would do, we got half the fresh wounded from Vietnam, Navy and Marines came to us, and half went to Yokosuka, Japan. If they had a big storm blowing there, we'd get all of theirs. If we had a big storm blowing, they'd get all of ours. The ward had a loading dock, and they would fly into Anderson Air Force Base on the other end of the island. The island's 30 miles by 30 miles long, 7 miles wide. They would load them there on these buses that had been gutted, and they had litters hanging all down both sides and down the middle. Then they would back up to this loading dock at the hospital where I was at, and they would unload them, and usually they'd get there around 2 in the morning. We would put all the guys to bed. Some of them minor wounds, but short timers that's going to send on home. Some of them were amputees that 2 days before had 2 legs, 2 arms, quadriplegic. We had everything. And when they came in, we put them to bed. We checked their med charts. We'd have one nurse typically on the ward that was built by the narcotics locker where they kept the morphine, Demerol, all that stuff. And the doctors would come in, and they're checking them over for this, that, and the other when they first get there. If they were in good enough shape and they could have it, they all got a hamburger, French fries, and Coca-Cola the first night they was on Guam. Well, that night we would keep them stabilized. We'd change IVs, do their meds, all of that. Next morning, all those guys would go to all the various wards, wherever they were needing to go to. Then that ward had to be totally stripped, and you had plastic over each bed covers, and those plastics had to be wiped down with betadine. Even if nobody sat on them, it had to be wiped down. Wasn't nothing to do 80 or more a night to these boys when they come through. Then the beds all had to be made up, the floors polished and all that. About 11 or 12, here come the boys that was either going back to Vietnam that had healed up good enough, or that's going back to the States for more in-depth treatment. Well, they would come in, sit around for maybe an hour or so, then the buses would come in, take them over to Anderson to go whichever way they were going. We had to totally strip that ward again, and then that night we'd get ready for the incoming group. Well, after about 6 months of that, I decided it's time to volunteer for the Marines, and the Marine Corps gets all their medics from the Navy. The Marine Corps is a branch of the Navy, and so anyway, the corpsman. I went back to Camp Pendleton, went through FMF, Fleet Marine Force training there, went through a recon indoctrination program, and then I had orders to go to 1st Marine Division, 1st Recon Battalion in Vietnam. When we landed in Vietnam at Da Nang, Airport 15, they came in and pulled, I think it was 10 of us, several of us that were corpsmen that were 8404. Because now all Navy corpsmen aren't qualified to go to the Marines, hadn't been through the training. And the ones that have are 8404. So I was an 8404. So they took us up to the DMZ, to 3rd Marines, and I stayed up there about a month till they got their replacements, and that's what it was. They were short a corpsman. Then I got back to 1st Recon. And that 1st Recon, we ran patrols typically in 6 and 8 man teams, and everybody's cross-trained. Like I was a medical corpsman, but I carried a backpack with 75 rounds in it for M79. And M79 is what we call a blooper gun or an elephant gun, had one shot, one barrel. But you had an HE round that you cocked it and you fired it like shooting a bow and arrow. I mean, you whoop, and that thing bloop, and you go out there and bloom, like shooting a grenade.
Sounds just like that too, don't it?
Yeah, it does. When it goes like bloop, and then you got your shotgun rounds, your gas rounds, your smoke rounds. So I carried a backpack with ammunition with the M79 strapped on top of it. Then I had my Unit 1 medical bag, went right here. Had my K-bar here, had an IV bottle on each side, which are taped up camouflage. And then I had my canteens would be anywhere from 4 to 8 usually, depending on where we were going. I'd carry more water than the Marines did, just simply because if they had heat stroke or whatever, you'd need the water for that, or cleaning a wound, or whatever, depending on where you were at. And then I had a gas mask on my leg. I carried 20 magazines of M16 ammunition. I carried an M16 with my arm on top of the Unit 1, let it ride there. I'd have 2 smokes, different colors. I'd bring the helicopters in with. The other boys, some of them would have smokes as well. Hand grenades, I'd have 2 gases, you know, CS gas. And and then you'd have your pouch on your butt. The name of it was an ass pack that you'd have your chow in. And so that's what I typically carried going on patrol. But there'd be 6 to 8 of us. We'd be camouflaged. Our job was to hide out in the jungle and find them, and then call in artillery, or maybe have the grunts come in, do a sweep or whatever. And the worst ones is where we saw a bunch of stuff, base camp or something. We'd call in artillery on it, and then they'd want you to go in and do body counts and that kind of stuff, and you never got them. Not all of them. You might get a few. They had tunnels and caves everywhere. Out in the middle of nowhere, they had tunnels and caves. Some of them 3 and 4 levels, you know. So we would do that. The advantage to recon, we PT'd hard. Everybody with recon wanted to be there. It got into a pride thing that, you know, if you're going to be there, you want to be with the best, and we felt like we were, and we sang songs saying we were the best. We got where we believed it. We weren't any better than anybody else, but we 21 years old, 18 years old, you know.
We gotta have y'all get motivated and whatnot. Anyway,
Oh yeah, and when we was in the rear, if our patrols left out after 1,200 hours at noon, we PT'd that morning. And I mean, when we PT'd, we're talking about running long distances, doing the flutter kicks, push-ups, doing the whole 9 yards. If our patrol left at 1,100 hours, we didn't have to PT that morning. Now, if our patrol got back at 1,300 hours, 1 p.m., we didn't have to PT that afternoon. If we got back at 1,100 hours, you had to PT that afternoon. And so, I mean, we were in good shape. We knew what we were doing. Typically with recon, everybody came in or nobody came in. They either got them all or none. I've got a buddy down in Florida that was a corpsman, and he had his home team. And like with us, with corpsmen, we were always short of corpsmen, even with recon. We were training Marines in the rear area to start an IV, to stop bleeding. And bottom line, with all that training we had, when you got into a combat situation, it was, you know, stop the bleeding, keep them breathing, bag them, tag them, get them out of here, and keep moving. That was about what you could do out in the field. But this buddy of mine, Doc Snyder, he's still down in Florida now, and he retired out of the Navy. But Doc was with recon, and he left, and after so many months, and went down to 1st Med Battalion. He'd gotten a promotion, and he was working what essentially would have been like an emergency room, where when the choppers first come in with the wounded and got them, he'd been there like 2 or 3 days when they brought his team in, and almost all of them were gone. and he won't ever get over it, And at any rate, we had a lot of. It was the kind of thing where I always say, it's like that old saying from the movies, it was the worst of times, it was the best of times. In a lot of ways, it was one of my best years of my life.
Yeah.
And you build friendships. I had a second lieutenant I thought a lot of. When I got home, like most of us, I just put all the military on the back burner. And I was proud of it, but going to college, you had these idiots running around wanting to be protest or wouldn't want to be hippies and stuff. And rather than just staying in a fight all the time, arguing with them, you just didn't bring it up and stayed away from them.
Yeah.
And you go to rodeos, it's very pro-America and the flags and all that. And if you'd been to Vietnam, that was a big plus at a rodeo, but that was about it. And to this day, rodeos for years, particularly in the last administration, that was as close as a lot of people got to going to church or to a patriotic meeting, was going to a rodeo. Well, at any rate, I was doing that and so forth. And I had one buddy of mine that lived on the other side of Nashville that was in recon with us. He was the only one that lived close that I knew. And he was something of a ripper when he was a young man, to be honest. And I got married one week. He got married the next week. Him and his wife had a boy. They divorced. He remarried her. They had a daughter. They got divorced. And Donnie come to see me one night, and this was back in the 70s. And he sat there and he said, back then people never had heard of post-traumatic stress syndrome. That was a term that hadn't been brought up. Everybody, if they had problems, they would have been having, I'm losing the phrase for it. But anyway, it was flashbacks.
PTSD.
Yeah, well, it was PTSD come along later,
Okay.
but it was flashbacks.
Yeah.
If somebody had trouble adjusting, it was flashbacks. Well, anyway, Donnie, he didn't have flashbacks. I didn't have flashbacks. But Donnie come up one night, and we were sitting there talking, and I never did do any drugs at all, marijuana, nothing else. Donnie, he liked that old ropey dope. I mean, he just did. And we were sitting there on a picnic table talking, and he said, Doc, he said, I smoked too much, said I drank too much, said I still like that old ropey dope, said a pretty girl goes by, I just got to see if she'll talk to old Donnie, said it must be flashbacks. And he sat there a minute and he said, nah, I was doing all that before I went in, so it couldn't be that. And I thought, I knew so many people that there are people that do have PTSD or post-traumatic. There's that many of them, and this many that are, they drink too much. Let's see, I know it's PTSD. Or they're running around with a strange woman and they're married. Post-traumatic stress, that's what it is. I'm a good boy. I said, they're coming back. Yeah. And it's gotten to be a crutch that so many people are abusing. And the sad part is there really are people that are having sincere problems. But there's so many, what I don't know anything call them but phonies, and they get to where they're looking for an easy way out. They're looking for an excuse for screwing up or whatever. And I went over, I was telling Charlie about this one day, and we would take clothes over to the VA hospital pretty often. And I would, and I got to know the little guy that run the laundry, and all the clothes that were donated at Murfreesboro, you could go to the laundry and pick them up, take them to Murfreesboro, they're gonna get laundered again. They're just very good about that. And I'd gone in, I got to where I knew the little guy that run the laundry, I liked him, and I'd pick at him a little bit. And there was a guy had on a suit coat with a name tag and all that, he was some kind of a deal there. And he said, I had on a Marine cap or Corpsman cap or a t-shirt or something. And he said, was you in the military? And I said, yeah. He said, I don't think I've ever seen you over here before. And I said, well, I just come see my buddy and bring him some more work, bring him some clothes. He said, was you in Vietnam? I said, I sure was. And he said, you don't use any of your benefits? I said, well, I got good insurance. And I said, I took and went to school on the GI Bill, and I said, I hadn't needed anything else. He said, what about PTSD? I said, what about PTSD? And he said, you don't think you've got it? And I said, no, not that I know of. And he said, that's the first sign. He said, you need to come over and some of our group meetings and stuff. And I've known several people that didn't have a sign of PTSD that would go to some of those type sessions, and within a month or two had decided they had it. And I had a buddy that I'd known for years. He's just the most happy-go-lucky guy you ever knew. He went over to have his leg looked at, or his back looked at. And when he did, they got him caught up in going in for some of the therapy and all that stuff. And he told me, he says, you know, Doc, I didn't know I had it till I went to those meetings and said, I've got it bad. And, you know, and I thought, man alive. And I guess a lot of mine is I've always gone 7 days a week, and I just hadn't had time. I may have it if I ever slow down, but yeah. I don't think so.
I never sat down and thought about it long enough.
one of the things I was proudest of, and I had a boy I hadn't seen since Vietnam come to see me about 3 months ago, and he had found out on the internet that I had throat cancer. And of course, everybody imagines the worst case scenarios when you say cancer or any of that anyway. But when we were in Vietnam, we had an observation post, Hill 119. And we would rotate. Different groups from the rear area at 1st Recon all had OPs, observation posts. We'd go set up on them, and we'd run night patrols, ambushes. 119 sit right between Hanoi Island and the Quay Son Mountains. And the Vietnamese would come in, the NVAVC tried to get by it to get to Da Nang. And we were about 30 or 40 miles from Da Nang. So our job was to guard this IOD team who was up there, had a machine that they could look over yonder mile or two on Hanoi Island. They see something moving through a scope. They hit a button, it sent out a laser beam. This is 1969. Mm-hmm. It'd come back, roll up, and give them the grid coordinates. Well, the Vietnamese were supposed to be in their villas after dark. They wasn't supposed to be out. So all they had to do was call in the grid coordinates and boom, that whatever it was moving wasn't moving no more. So that was their deal. Yeah. Well, they had this one boy with them, Mark Bike. They could speak fluent Vietnamese. Well, there was 2 villages way down below Hill 119, one way down this way, one down that way. And they would bring their sick or wounded halfway up that hill. They weren't allowed to come inside. We had concertina wire all the way around that hill in the bunkers. They'd bring them halfway up, and me or whatever corpsman was on the hill would go down and treat them. And, you know, whatever it was, usually you could do something and send them back. And all Vietnamese wounded were, you had routine, priority, and emergency. All civilians were routine. Didn't matter if they had an arm off, what happened, they was routine. So I didn't learn them, and the Vietnamese called a corpsman Boxy, and Boxy means doctor. They just, closest thing to a doctor they'd seen, so we go down and we was big stuff. And I'd always carry some cigars in my pocket, penny candies I'd get sent from home, and I'd have that for the kids. And I've got pictures of the kids, they're all climbing all over me and all that. And we would go down and do our thing and visit with them. And Mark could translate for me as far as that went. Well, we're up on that hill, and this is the ones that know the story. In fact, I was vice president of the 1st Marine Division chapter in Tennessee for several years, and had to go to all the big meetings at the time for 1st Mardil. And we were sitting there at a table, and 2 guys behind us were telling this story. And the guy said, he didn't. He said, I heard him, he did it. You know, what'd they do to him, you know? And I told my wife, I said, they're talking about me. And I reached around and tapped the guy. And he said, what? I said, I'm Doc Mullins. He said, were you 1st Recon on it? I said, I'm the one. He said, man, everybody up here said, I want you to tell us to the guy what you did. So what I did, we look up, it's getting late in the afternoon, and here come some villagers up the hill. Well, they'd shoot looms at night. These would be old parachutes, and they would come down to the ground, light up an area when you called in the looms. Well, those things were silk, or silk-type material, and the Vietnamese used them for everything, but they'd particularly use them for litters. And they'd take a pole and put somebody wounded in it and cart them up to me. So we could see them, and when you went off the hill, it would dip. And just like right here, looking down here, you can't see the bottom of the hill, but you walk a few feet, you could. Well, it was like that coming down off that hill. You had little dips and grades there. And as we come down off that hill, coming down, we could see this girl and a baby, or a young child, and the people were gone. They'd brought her halfway up and left. They never had done that. Well, this kid, I'm trying to think how to tell it without being too gross, but basically this young woman was full of shrapnel. If she had tripped a booby trap, she could have been VA. Well, in fact, she had a bandage on her hip. It was definitely NBA, no doubt about it. The NBA had worked on her, and then they'd give up and send her up to us. But we weren't supposed to know that. But anyway, her right hip, you could open and close like a book. It was just hanging on by a thread of skin. And she was in terrible shape. Well, I did my thing as far as the corpsman went, and I said, we got to get her medevaced. Well, I had Mike Thorns, Mike Carver, and Mark Bayek there. Mike Carver was a radio man. Mike Thorns had a gun. They were guarding me and translating. I said, Mike, call in. We got an emergency medevac. So he said, they ain't going to go for it. And I said, I don't care. I said, this girl's going to die if we don't get her some help. So he called it in, and they wanted to know the serial number and all that on the guy that was wounded. So he come back and fessed up. It was a civilian. It was a female and was in bad shape. And he said, well, all Vietnamese civilians down there are routines, and we got the choppers tied up, so we can't send a chopper. So I said, let me have a radio, and I got it. And I said, sir, and there was like majors is the one calling the shots on approving or disapproving the helicopters. I said, this girl's got a baby with her, and I said, the people have left her. And he said, well, y'all just leave her where they left her. And I said, we can't. I said, if we leave her where they left her, I said, Tiger or something, get her tonight. And I said, if that don't happen, she died during the night. I said, she's got to be in a hospital. Well, that ain't your worry. You leave her where she's at. And I said, we can't leave her where she's at. I said, at the very least, we need to take her back in the wire where we can monitor tonight, try to get her out of here in the morning. He said, I'm telling you, ordering you to leave her where she's at. And I said, we're not going to do that. And I said, and the boys had already told me they weren't going to leave me if I stayed, they'd stay. I said, if we got to, we'll just sit right here with her. He said, you leave her where she's at and you go. I said, if you think we're going to leave her down here, you can kiss my, I went in a little bit of my stuff I'd learned in med school for terminology, but basically my bottom side. Mm-hmm. I told him he could kiss that. And boy, he blew up and on the radio. So finally he decided that we could bring her back in the wire, but they wanted us to blindfold her and the baby.
Yeah.
Which that girl didn't know where she was. I mean, it was crazy. So we go back up in the wire and got her in. I stayed up with her all night. Mark Bayek, this boy could speak Vietnamese. And that child was scared to death of us. I mean, she just really was. And of course, they done educated them that we were bad people. Right. And we was going to torture them or do something worse. And I know Mark tried to give her some candies and she wouldn't touch them, and kids starving to death. And but at any rate, I think he had a little top he got out of a Cracker Jack box that he gave her, and I laid it down and she picked it up and got to playing with it. But at any rate, we was up there all night. Well, the next morning they sent a chopper first thing to come get her, which I wasn't expecting that. And I thought, boy, I'm up a creek, and but what are they going to do, send me to Vietnam? I mean, I'm already here. Yeah. Well, what had happened was in the rear area, the battalion CO had some South Vietnamese Army guys up there, VIPs. Their generals, Army, they had South Vietnamese Marines, South Vietnamese Navy, and all that. They were monitoring all this. Well, they were needing some good PR, that we were out there to help the people. Well, here they got this corpsman on the radio that's fighting a Marine officer in the rear area to try to save this girl's life. So when that all come off, and all of a sudden I went from zero to hero. And we sent her back, and I don't know whatever became of her, but it was funny. It went on years and years, and like I say, I kind of got away from, I didn't stay in touch with anybody but my buddy Donnie in Nashville. And Donnie eventually married a real nice girl, and he got straightened out, and he was doing great. And then, bless his heart, he came up with throat cancer about 2 years ago, but it was too far gone to do much with, and we lost Donnie last year. But at any rate, we would go to these meetings and stuff, the first Mardale meetings, and we went back to Vietnam in 2000 on a recon reunion tour. And through the course of that, I found out that Gary Parks, who was a second lieutenant with us, had become a brigadier general. And that our company CEO I thought a lot of, Jerry Spalter, was in San Francisco, was a big-time maritime lawyer. So I made contact with Jerry and then with Gary. And from that point on, Gary wanted me to be at all of his promotion ceremonies, me and my wife. And they flew us out to San Diego. And he went to D.C. to the Pentagon. We went up to that big statue of Iwo Jima. He got promoted to Major General. And they'd have the Secretary of the Navy introduce me, and I was Gary's corpsman in Vietnam. And I put a Band-Aid on his thumb one time or some stuff. It'd make some heroic story. And Gary wound up retiring as Deputy Commandant of the United States Marine Corps, Lieutenant General. And we was there for his retirement ceremony and all that stuff. But going to those dinners and stuff around the country, we had meetings in D.C., Kansas City, Palm Desert, just had them everywhere. But when I first started on the computer, it was right after I got back from that trip. And I didn't know zip about a computer hardly. And my buddy Donnie had already been in touch with a lot of people. He'd been fooling with the computer for a while. So Donnie, he come back that he was on the computer that there was a boy, Mark Bayek, had been trying to find me. He was the interpreter, was on that hill, and I hadn't seen him. Well, went on one night, and I was showing my wife, Ann, who now she lives on the computer, what she does for a living. But she was in there, and I was showing her the emails and how this worked. Bam, there's one from Beijing, China. And Mark works for the embassy in Beijing, China, and at that time. And he said, Doc said, I don't know if you remember me or not, but he said, I'm a mid-level employee with the U.S. Embassy, and I'm in Beijing, China, and he went through a deal. And he said, I'll always be mid-level because I don't toady up to anybody. He said, I don't kiss anybody's rear, and he went through all of that. And he said, an incident that we were part of in Vietnam always has guided me. And he said, would you told a major what he could do, and you wound up helping save that girl. Said, since that time, somebody gives me a stupid order or a direction, said, I think, what would Doc Mullins do? Mm-hmm. So I printed those off. I've got those. I kept both of those. Well, we emailed a little bit for a while and lost contact. And then he found out about my throat cancer. And honestly, he came to see me because he didn't know if I'd be here in 6 months or not. And he had wanted to, and he lived in northern Minnesota, almost in Canada. A real nice little guy. And he came down, and we hung out and talked. And there's an officer that was with us in Vietnam is doing another book on Hill 119. And I've been in a couple of books about Vietnam already. But he's doing a book purely about Hill 119, and I've been sending him pictures and stuff, and Mark, this buddy of mine from Minnesota, has. So we're going to be immortalized again sometime in next year or so about me telling some Marine major to kiss off. But no, I tell you, when you got scared in Vietnam, you've never been more scared in your life.
Yeah.
When you got out from under it, you ain't never been no happier in your life. Ain't nothing you'll do ever again that's going to. We used to have extraction ladders, and they didn't use those but a couple of years because it was so bad to hang in trees. They came up with a strap after that, but we used them when I was there. That's when they started using them. And what they would do, say you'd have an area like this that a helicopter couldn't sit down here maybe. Maybe the trees was a little bit closer in on both sides, and there wasn't nowhere to get to them, and you're under fire.
Yeah.
You can't, you've done tried to break contact, and you can't. So what they'd do is they'd have two gunships come in, and they'd just start working out all around you. They'd be trying to get everybody's heads down. Well, then there'd be two 46 helicopters. They're the ones that look like a flying banana with the double rotors. One of them would go high. That's in case the first one gets shot down. That one would come in, and they'd kick this ladder out that would unroll, aluminum ladder. Had a place there, you climb up on it, you grab your arms under it like this, and sat down on the rungs, and then you'd have a guy beside you typically. And then when everybody's on it, they'd take off and they'd fly you. I mean, you're way up yonder where they couldn't shoot you. And they'd go to a safe area and sit down. And when that ladder set down, it would just start collapsing, you know, as aluminum cables, and then you'd step off of it. But the problem you'd have, sometimes those ladders would hang in the trees. And you always understood that if it came down to 6, 8 recon guys and a helicopter and a bunch of guys on it, there was one pin they could pull and drop that ladder.
Yeah.
Now, I never knew of a helicopter crew to drop a ladder. Never did know it.
It was
But
always possible.
anytime you was riding one of them suckers, you was thinking it. And then they came up with this deal with straps welded in, sewn in it. And what you did on it, called it a spy rig, S-P-I-E. And when we went out on patrol, we wore a rope around their waist up through a middle to make a Swiss seat out of, and you had 2 D-rings in it. And that was in case you was rappelling or you had to lock into that ladder or that spy rig. And when you hooked into the spy rig, it was just one strap, but you'd interlock arms. When they'd take off, if you didn't do your arm and legs on both sides, that son gonna go spinning with you, and then somebody above would puke on you. So, you know, you didn't want to be the guy that's doing the puking because somebody kill you when you got back.
Yeah.
But they start using the spy rigs the year I left. I rode a spy rig 2 or 3 times, but we used ladders until they came up with the spy rig. But it was a different time. Had some great guys I served with, and you know, the ones of us that made it home. I had a little fella, Nano Villasana, that I thought the world of, was on our home team. And when he got killed, I'd been home about a month. And what had happened, they were trying to pull him out on a ladder, and it wrapped around a tree. And when it did, that helicopter came down. They sent a helicopter out to try to rescue him, that group, and they crashed in Birds. They lost 2 helicopters, 2 helicopter crews, the recon team, and that's what happened to Nano. And I didn't this year. Last year, being Nano's sister wrote back and forth a little bit, Christmas cards and all that. And she'd always talk about how funny Nano was. His name was Fernando Villasana. But he was funny, and he had just whatever. He just had a knack about making you laugh. He was just a funny little son gun. And we'd mess with him all the time, you know. But yeah, at my age, at 21, and it's sort of like that back here, you know, when you was in high school, somebody in college was old. You got in college, somebody that had gotten out of college was old. And then it kind of progressed on up the ladder. And then by the time you got to be 40 or 50, and then you was branching out to 20 years this way and that way, you know. But when you was 21, with 18, 19-year-olds, you was the old man, you know. Yeah, I wouldn't take nothing for it. I had a good run. I was lucky through the whole time, you know. Yeah, and I often thought about just staying, you know, I really did. It was a different time, different place. But if I stayed, I went and had my 3 daughters and my 3 son-in-laws and my 3 grandsons and my great-grandson and a nice wife to boot. So there you go.
Yeah.
When I got to work for Charlie.
Yeah, absolutely.
Charlie, of course, with his age, he missed Vietnam primarily because of age, but then too he had bad eyes and his size. But he was always the biggest patriot that ever lived. I mean, he just was very big on the military and people that served, you know, and he'd do anything he could just about. And he went back to Iraq and Afghanistan, and he'd go to South Korea, he'd go to military bases here in the States, but he probably had more time in military than I did.
Mm-hmm. You ever felt like he might have wished he would have been a part of it or went?
I think so. You know, and I run into that a lot with a lot of people my age, more so. And when I came back and was going to college, we had a group of what I'd call wannabe hippies.
Yeah.
They didn't really know what a hippie was, and they had seen them on TV and the Haight-Ashbury and all that garbage, and you'd have them kind of protesting and stuff. but they didn't even know what they was protesting, and the ones out in Haight-Ashbury didn't either. All they knew was they could get drunked up, smoke dope, and say this is against the war, and nobody arrested them. So that was their gig. That was all that was about.
Oh yeah.
But at any rate, it was a lot of people I've encountered. I think honestly, it was like me when I was a corpsman on the ward over there on Guam. One of the first things, I had 2 corpsmen with us that had been in Vietnam, and then their assignment when they left Vietnam was there at the hospital. They was on my ward. And when these guys would come in wounded, invariably one of the first questions they'd ask you would be, who was you with in Nam? Well, I had Larry Houts. He was 1-9. They call the Walking Dead grunt unit up in the 3rd Marines. There's several of them. And boy, they just lock on to them like, man, you're my corpsman. You're the one I want to see. And they'd ask me, who did you serve with? Well, I had never been to Vietnam, Oh, okay. And it's like, some of them, not all of them. They was all pretty nice too. They appreciated you trying to help them. But I think it was more me feeling guilty that I hadn't been to Vietnam than it was them feeling like I should be guilty. I think it was more inside of me than it was them. And I just really got tired of Guam, and you could either die, you could serve out your time on Guam, or you could go to Vietnam. And I just decided I'd rather go to Vietnam. I had to spend the rest of it on Guam, Mm-hmm. And I'm glad I did. And like I say, now with the computers, in recent years, there's several of the guys that I stay in touch with. Some of them will disappear, and you won't know what happened to them. Go off the computer for a while, and then they'll come back, and so it's kind of neat for that. And I hadn't done any of the. I got out of being with the 1st Marine Division. I'm a lifetime member, but I got to where I wasn't where I had to be at the meetings, and I just kind of got meetinged out, to be honest with you. And so. I'm all for them. I'm glad to have the associations, but I've been there, done that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it sounds like you've lived a very, very interesting life, and I'm
sure we've only touched the surface.
A lot of cool stories.
We've had fun.
Oh yeah, I mean, for sure. There's so many different ways we could, or so many more questions we could be asking and everything.
We just appreciate you doing this.
We're glad to do it. I appreciate you guys. I'd have loved to come down to y'all's place to seen the bull and pick the bull up, and I got waylaid on it. My biggest thing now with my treatments and the medications that I'm on, and I'm doing great. I think we've got this thing whipped, but I'm still not out of the woods with it yet. As if I go in at night and sit down 5 minutes, I'm asleep. I'll tap out. And I don't really trust myself driving. I mean, I run to Pulaski, see old JJ and sell him a truck or run somewhere. But to drive 3 or 4 hours, I don't trust myself yet, and I've got my grandson when he can go with me or whatever. So, but it's getting better every day. And I had the doctor, I took that as a compliment, my main cancer doctor. I've got 4 of them. He told me one day he walked in, and I was standing there looking out the window, and he come in. I turned around and shook hands with him, and we talked a few minutes. And he said, it's just amazing. I said, what's amazing? He said, I've been doing this 30 years. And he said, I've never seen anybody with your attitude. And I said, I grew up with a mom or daddy that would bust your can if you didn't do what you're supposed to do, and you worked. I said, I never did know what an allowance was. I said, I rodeoed about 6 years, and I got banged up and beat up. I said, I spent my time with Uncle Sam's Marine Corps and the Navy. And I said, then I'd done these other jobs. But I said, the biggest thing I learned in life is that old saying that it's not your aptitude, but your attitude that's going to determine your altitude. And I said, that's like this thing. I've got it. I ain't happy about it. I can't just cut it off like that. But I can't just sit down either. And he says, well, when do you think you might try to go back to work? I said, Doc, I've been working every day since I've had it. I said, I've had to slow down in some areas. But I said, except for 9 days I was in the hospital with pneumonia, I said, I've been at the barn checking cows, bush hogging, doing what you got to do. And of course, y'all can relate. Because there's Mr. Glenn that's had health problems. He's out riding that tractor, bush hogging. He can't do some of the stuff he used to do right now, but there's stuff he can do, and he's darn well going to do it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And that's what keeps him going. That's what makes him, And my dad was that way, and he grew up. His mother died when he was 13. Built a business on his own, worked every day, lived to be 97. And attitude. That's the thing there.
Attitude plays a big key.
And it's like Charlie Daniels. I've heard him say it more than once. I'd be a little depressed about not doing what I'd like to at the ranch, money-wise, seeing it come in, making more money. And he'd say, Bud, nothing I ever did was easy. And he said, you just got to keep working it. You got to have attitude. And that's it. If you ain't got attitude, you're whipped.
Yeah, absolutely.
On the wood burning stove, and it had a kerosene, and the kerosene was took up a lot of room and went up through, had a tank over here, so I put in this wood burning stove. But this is a caboose is the name of the model of this stove, but they wouldn't have this kind of stove on a caboose or a train because of the legs. That thing rocking going down through there and tear the legs off, so they didn't have them. And then there's a letter I got from Bob Hope, and I didn't get to go see his show, and I just sent a letter to Bob Hope, Hollywood, California, and I didn't have any idea he'd ever did it or nothing else. I told him I missed the show, and that one of the boys had brought back a picture and had gotten mushed up there on the hill, and he sent me that nice note and that picture there. And when he died, I read a thing that said that every serviceman ever wrote to him, he answered it. There had to be a bunch of them.
Yeah, there had to be a bunch
and
of them.
There's Charlie and Gary's niece, and the picture with Charlie with the yellow shirt on. That's when he went. I was inducted into the Grand Ole Opry.
It's a big night.
Yeah, it was. And that flag there, that was the South Vietnamese Marines, and they had an officers club when we put some of their people through training for like a little recon indoctrination program, and we put them through a training program, and we all got a beret that they wore, but somebody stole their flag out of the officers club. We never did find out what happened to it, but at any rate, it disappeared. Somebody might have carried it to Australia and sent it home from there.
Yeah, ain't no telling what might have happened to that flag right there.
That's a deal. That's an old Will Rogers clock. Will Rogers was like the biggest star in America forever. You got him there. Then this is when I had these upholstered, these seats. These cost more, about double than what it cost to do those, and the reason is these flip back and forth. That's why if you're going down the track and they wanted somebody looking the other way, they could flip that switch, throw that seat over in the back here, and you're sitting looking out the back window. And then those two pictures there, the one where I'm holding the rifle, standing there in front of the fireplace holding the rifle, that's Davy Crockett's first rifle that he ever owned. And Joe Swan up in East Tennessee owns it. And what happened, Davy bought the rifle, and then he traded it to back to the guy he bought it from, that had like a little trading goods store there, for a mare and some farming implements to start his household when he got married. And then wasn't real long, old Davy was getting kind of famous. Of course, he had bad luck everywhere he went. He went to Fayetteville, and then he went to Lawrenceburg, and his meal washed out, and then went to West Tennessee. But he wound up in the state legislature and in Congress. Well, the family kept the rifle and kept all the paperwork with it, and it stayed in the family. Then Joe, when Davy Crockett, the TV show, come out, his grandma or mother one told him that their uncle had Davy's first rifle and what the story was on it. That guy had worked for the railroads and was in Oklahoma. He goes out there and Ash just wants to see it. He had it sitting in a corn crib. And so he gets it out and buys it off of him, brings it home and has it restored. But that's actually the rifle, definitely no question about it, that belonged to Davy Crockett. That's kind of a neat picture.
Dang, that's crazy.
Yeah. And I don't think $1 million to touch it. There's me and Buck Taylor. It's played newly. And then let's see, that right there, that's one of Festus's hats there. It has on the inside there, where it's made for Ken Curtis, who played Festus. That's one of his hats. And that's where they would take them and weather them, beat them up and condition them for the shows. That's one of his hats. And then Charlie, for years, when he come down to ride or rope or do anything, that was the hat Charlie wore. And he bought that in Durango. And they got the Stampede string on it and all of that. I've got all kinds of old pictures of Charlie with that hat on. Rope in there fooling around, riding the horses or whatever. And then that, in fact, Festus, if y'all ever watch Gunsmoke, if y'all ever watch it at all, he always has a male mule named Ruth. All of his mules in the show were always named Ruth, but he was, the deal on Ruth was on one of his record albums. I've got his all Ken Curtis's record. He tells a story where he was a Confederate mule handler, and at the Battle of Franklin, he was at Spring Hill, and they had 6 young Confederate generals killed, and they sent him and Ruth to bring them back to Spring Hill. And then when he got back, and this is just a story, made up story, but he tells it, he gets back, Ruth collapses and dies, and but she made it back with the 6 bodies. And so from that point on, he promised Ruth that all of his mules from then on be named Ruth. So that's why all of Festus's mules were named Ruth, and kind of the deal at Spring Hill. It's on a record album that they had. These chaps here, they belong to, those are Tom Mick's chaps. And used to, the kids could save up their box tops and all that and get decoder rings and different things. And it was done by Purina. Then you can see it's got Tom Mix there, TM. He got his brand, Tom Mix, and the checkerboard. Mm-hmm. And then that was a Disney coonskin cap that they came out with right when the movie came out. And then that vest there is a Blackfoot Indian vest. That's from about 1890. Sure. And then, it's all beaded. And then Guy Gilchrist did a lot of work with the Muppets, and for years he's the one that did Sluggo and Nancy in the funny papers when they were still publishing them. Mm-hmm. And Guy's an old buddy of mine. And my dad, I named the caboose Herschel, and that's my dad when he was like 5 or 6 years old. So Guy did that one with him driving the train. And then he did my wife and me and the girls. Oh, that's my youngest girl, that's the oldest girl, that's the middle girl, and then that's my wife, and that's me in the caboose. And that's my 3 grandsons, and then that's my great-grandson, me and him. And Guy did those for us. And then, let's see, I just got junk everywhere. This saddle, that's Charlie. That was his saddle, and I bought it when they were selling all of his stuff. And I went ahead and got it. That's Charlie's work saddle. He had Gary Dunshee down in Alpine, Texas, built that. And Charlie had 2. He had one he literally just wore out almost over years and years of wear. The next one he had about 3 months when the barn burned, and then we ordered this one. So that was his, and I rode it most of the time because I was on the road all the time to keep it broke in. Then, are y'all familiar with Ty Murray? He's a world champion cowboy several times over. Of course, Ty's about 50 years old now. But that picture there with a little boy and the other guy and Charlie in the middle. In fact, Charlie's got this hat on. That was made down in Texas. And when they came up and shot that Wrangler Cowboy Country Christmas, Ty autographed that picture for Charlie. And that's Ty, the little kid. That's when he was still just a pup. They had him there. And that's me and Baxter. And then, got my some train stuff there. And then those boots are the boots I wore in Vietnam. And that bush cover, that's the cover I wore. I got that beret for helping train some little Vietnamese. I had a buddy that was in the Marine Raiders in World War II that was a corpsman, and that was his amputation hatchet. This little, looks like the thing right here, and that thing there was used for field amputations. And you would think something that little would do it, but that thing's, you can whack a finger off or take a wrist off or finish a leg off or something. Had loose meat hanging. You could go after it with that. You don't ever see those. Those are rare. I've got.
That's crazy.
He died about 3 years ago. He lived in Tampa, and we'd go down there every year, and Charlie would do a benefit for Angelus, for handicapped folks, and he would, Doc would come up, and he wrote a book that I've got a copy of. He signed to me, but at any rate, he had that, and gave it to me, I guess. I'd been up here about 3 months, and I heard that he had died, you know, and he was a good old man. I really thought a lot of him. He was the youngest corpsman with the Marines when they formed the Raiders.
Wow.
Yeah, he was a character. And that's Charlie in this saddle. That was on his 80th birthday. And that horse there is at New Beginnings. That was out of old T.P. King Bear's favorite stud. He got to ride him anyway.